8.5, variation functions. So there's two kinds of variation that we're going to start off with. One is direct variation. So I suggest that you pause the video so you can copy down the information here. Direct variation, it's always a linear equation. It always goes through 0, 0. The equation that we're going to use for direct variation is y equals kx. K is the constant of variation, or the slope. Then we have a sentence that all the direct variation problems pretty much come in a word problem form. So you need to be able to recognize the sentence that indicates that we've got direct variation and how to put it into an equation. So the sentence that would give me direct variation would say y varies directly as x. That very sentence gives me this equation. So the first variable is the y equals varies directly as, and then the x. So whatever the first variable is what the y would be. The last variable is where the x would go. Now how do I know if it's direct variation? Both the x and the y will go up at the same time. So if x is 3 and y is 6, when x moves to 12, y will also go up from 6 as well. Now inverse variation, I suggest that you pause the video so you can copy down information about inverse variation. Inverse variation, this gives me an equation for a hyperbola. So direct variation is linear, inverse variation is a hyperbola. And that's because we're going to have x in the denominator. That hyperbola is going to have asymptotes at x equals 0 and y equals 0. Now the sentence that would give us the inverse variation is y varies inversely as x. Again, the position of the x and the y, the first variable, and for y, the x is the second variable. We have y equals k over x. That's because we need that variable in the denominator to be a hyperbola. Then as x goes up for inverse variation, y will go down. So remember, in direct variation, they both go up at the same time. They both go down at the same time. Inverse variation, as one goes up, the other one goes down. Let's take a look at some problems. We'll get back to joint and combined in just a moment. But for variation, I highly suggest to you that you create a table that organizes your information after you've decided what your equation is. So my equation comes from the sentence, y varies directly as x. So that sentence, remember, gives us this equation. It won't always be x and y, so it's important to remember the first variable goes in for y. The second variable goes in for x. Then the rest of the information is going to go into a table. So it says that y equals 12 when x equals 8. So 8, 12 go together. Find y, so that's our question mark, when x is 14. So when x is 14, we don't know what y is, but those are paired together. So the first step that you're going to do with any variation problem is you're going to plug the completed pair, or completed triple later on, into the equation, because we want to find out what k equals. So we have 12 equals k times 8. And you're going to solve to find out what k equals. So we're going to divide both sides by 8 and reduce. Now remember, you can reduce with your calculator or you can reduce by hand, but I really suggest to you that you don't use decimals for k. So if I divide 12 by 8, then I get 3/2. So my equation is going to change to be y equals 3/2 x. Because that constant of variation will be constant no matter what ordered pair I'm looking at. So now we have a value for x, we have a value for k. We're going to plug in both to figure out what y is. So y equals 3/2 times 14. So 3/2 times 14 is 21. Let's get down to number 3, which is inverse variation. Here's the sentence that gives me the equation. Y varies inversely as x. And the process for solving all of these, no matter what kind of variation you have, is exactly the same. The difference is what your equation will be. So instead of y equals kx, we're going to have y equals k over x. And then set up our table. It says that y is 18 when x is 16. So those are a matched pair. Find x when y is 9. So we're going to plug in the matched pair together. 18 equals k over 16. And to solve this, I have to multiply both sides by 16. And when I do that, I get that k is 288. So my equation for all of the ordered pairs on this line is 288 over x. So that means I can plug in what I know. I know y. I can plug it in for y. So 9 equals 288 over x. To solve this, we're going to multiply both sides by x because I can't have x in the denominator. So I have 9x equals 288, and then divide by 9 on both sides. So 288 divided by 9 gives me that x is equal to 32. So when x is 32, y is 9. Now let's talk about the other kinds of variation that we have. We have joint and we have combined variation. So pause the video, copy down what's here about them. Joint variation is what happens when I have two variables that are both varying directly as the third variable. So instead of just y varies directly as x, it's x and z. You might also see it said as y varies jointly as x and z. And how do you know if it's joint variation? All three values are going to be increasing at the same time. So if x and z are going up, y is going up. Combined variation is exactly like it sounds. It's both direct and inverse variation. Now this sentence might be one of the easiest ones to make because it says direct as x, and we know that that means k multiplied by x. Then it says inverse is z, so that means that I'm going to divide everything by z. How do you know if it's combined variation? It would have both direct and inverse. So when I look at number 2, it says, suppose y varies directly as x and z. That sentence matches joint variation. So my equation will be a joint variation equation. Y equals kxz. Now this time my table has 3 columns because I have x, y, and z. So it says find y, so that's a question mark. X is 9, y, and z is -3. Then it says that y equals -50 when x is 5, z is 5, and x is -10. Please make sure that you put the question mark in as you go along because I see a lot of times people matching just the first 3 numbers together in a row and then the next 2 together in a row and put the question mark wherever it ends. But that's not really what's happening. It says find y when. So find y when the matching pairs are 9 and -3. So to solve this, we're doing it the same way we've done before, only this time we have a triple instead of a pair. So we have y is -50. Looking for k. X is negative 10, and Z is 5. I'm using the completed triple here, the completed row. So I have negative 10 times 5 gives me negative 50. So I have K times negative 50. For solving for K, I got to divide by negative 50 on both sides. So I get that K is equal to 1. So my joint variation equation is Y equals 1 X times Z. Now we can go back and use our incomplete row and plug in the values that we know. I don't know Y. I know X is equal to 9, and I know that Z is equal to negative 3. So 9 times negative 3 times 1 is negative 27. So to complete the pair or the triple, Y has to be negative 27. Number 4. Map of Illinois is scaled so that 2 inches represents 15 miles. How far apart is Chicago and Rockford if they are 12 inches apart on the map? So I know that there are lots of ways that you can do this particular problem, but we chose this problem for the notes because it's the easiest one to show you how to do it. There are some direct variation and inverse variation problems that are word problems where you won't be able to necessarily see them set up a different way. So I really encourage you to solve it this way with direct and inverse variation. So we need to know which kind of variation this is representing. So I have the inches on the map and the inches in real life. As the inches on the map increase, the distance in real life should also increase. Since both values are increasing, that represents a direct variation equation. So I have the distance in real life equals the constant times the distance on the map. So if we set up our table, the distance on the map is 2, the distance in real life is 15. The distance on the map is 12. We don't know what the distance in real life is. So I have 15 equals K times 2. Divide by 2 on both sides, and K is equal to 7.5, or 15 halves, whichever way you want to write it. So my new equation would be Y equals 7.5 times X. So I can plug in my incomplete row. Y equals 7.5 times 12. 7.5 times 12 is 90. And it's distance in real life, so it's miles. Number 5 and number 6. So we have suppose A varies directly as B and A varies inversely as C. They said direct and they said inverse. That represents a combined variation equation. So A, that's the first variable. Remember, that goes in for Y. Varies directly as B. So KB. Inversely as C over C. So there's our equation. Now we can set up our table. So I have find B, so that's question mark. A is 8, C is negative 3. If B is 16, C is 2, and A is 4. So our completed row would be the bottom one, 4, 16, and 2. So we have 4 equals K times 16 over 2. To solve this, we multiply by 2 on both sides. So I have 8 equals k times 16. Then divide by 16 on both sides. So k is equal to 1/2 or 0.5. So we plug it back into our equation. A equals 1/2 or 0.5 B over C. Let's plug in what we know. I know A. I know C. So I'm going to solve the problem. I'm going to multiply by -3 on both sides to get it off of the denominator. And then we're going to divide by 1/2, which is the same thing as multiplying by 2. So B equals -48. Last problem here. D varies directly as F and D varies inversely as G. That's a combined variation situation because it said direct and inverse. So D is going to go in for Y because it's the first variable listed. Varies directly as F, so KF. Inversely as G. So we're going to set up our equations here. I have D, F, and G. Find G. D is 6, F is -7. G equals 12, F equals 3, and D equals 9. So our completed set is 9, 3, and 12. We're going to plug those in for D, F, and G. So I have 9 equals K times 3 over 12. To solve this, we're going to multiply by 12 on both sides. So we have 9 times 12. It's 108 equals K times 3. Then divide by 3 on both sides, and we get that K is equal to 36. So my equation is D equals 36F over G. So now let's plug in our incomplete row. 6 goes in for D, and -7 goes in for F. We're finding out G. 36 times -7 equals -252. So we have to multiply by G on both sides to get rid of G on the bottom. Then we can divide both sides by 6, and we get that G is equal to -42.